You're watching HuffPost Live. I'm Alicia Menendez. Regardless of your political and religious views, the feelings associated with choosing to have an abortion can be personally difficult. Add to that persistent cultural stigma, a lack of emotional support available to women following this medical procedure, and it's no surprise that even the right choice can be a difficult one to make and to live with. With us is a group of women who are sharing their stories so that others will know that they are not alone. Joining us, I have Aspen Baker. She's the founder and executive director of Exhale, an after-abortion support group, Cassie Underwood, a writer in New York City, Dr. Kate Blanchard, Associate Professor of Religious Studies at Alma College, Natalia Cos-Vallejo, a feminist activist in Milwaukee, and Sarah Tuttle Singer, a writer in Tel Aviv. Thank you all so much for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Sarah, I love that you say you thought of yourself as a nice Jewish girl. Nice Jewish girls do get abortions, though. I think you're muted, Sarah, upper right-hand corner. Just click that mic thing there. There we go.
Okay, hi. Yeah, it turns out that nice Jewish girls do get abortions.
How did you find yourself in that position?
Yeah, I'm 19 years old and in between cramming for an anthro final and needing to take a class on ancient Israelites religion. Nauseous, bloated, peeing on a stick, and there you go. There's a plus sign. And something you think will never happen to you is happening to you. And it was a shock. It was devastating. It was also surreal, because this is something you see on a Lifetime movie, or it's something that's resolved in 20 minutes on a sitcom, usually with a happy ending. But it doesn't. It never once crossed my mind that it could happen to me in my real life.
And when it did happen, did you feel like you had people you could talk with about it?
I'm really lucky. I have a great network of friends. And freshman year of college, my best friend was there for me. I actually tested, I took a pregnancy test with another girl on my floor because her period was late. And it turns out she wasn't pregnant, and my period wasn't particularly late, but I was pregnant. So she was also supportive.
Yeah.
And completely lucky to have had friends like that during that time. And then
you got that
son,
guy
by the
there,
way.
yeah.
This is someone who's going to hear all about it when he's a lot older. You want to wave?
Did having him change the way that you felt about it, retrospectively?
Well, I'll tell you, he's actually my second. When I got pregnant with my first, and I was lying there with my legs in stirrups with the ultrasound wand, looking for a sign of life in my uterus, and I saw that twinkling heartbeat. It was such a mind trip, a complete paradigm shift, that I could look at that twinkling heartbeat and be thrilled that there was a baby inside of me, a miracle, a life unfolding, when just 7 years before I had seen that same, different heartbeat, but the same image, and said to myself, this is a parasite, get it out of me, I don't want it, it's not a baby, it's just a clump of cells. So that was certainly a big change for me.
Yeah, Cassie, you found yourself in a fairly similar position and making a similar choice.
Yes, I was 19 years old, a college student in Vermont, and I was an alcoholic, and I was dating a drug addict, and I was trying to finish with a degree, and I never thought I would get pregnant before I was ready. I always wanted to be a mother, and I did, and I was shocked to find that I wanted to have an abortion after a lot of thought and consideration.
Yeah, did you regret that decision at any point?
I think I went through periods of regret, but now I'm pretty confident that I made that decision after prayer and meditation, and it was the right decision for me.
Yeah, what did the regret involve? What did the regret look like?
Well, regret, the literal meaning of regret is mourning. And so I did go through a period of mourning what could have been.
Yeah, what could have been. Natalia, you were even younger. You were 16, and now that I am 29, 16 seems so young to be faced with having to make a decision like this. Did you have people you could talk to?
No, I really didn't have anybody at all. Just period, no one. I told my boyfriend at the time because I needed a partner to help scrounge up the cash to get through it, and that was pretty much it.
Yeah, Aspen, I mean, I hear from a lot of women that they feel this way, that there's not a parent they can go to, there's not a friend they can go to, and that they really would like to contain the incident and make it as much about themselves and no one else as possible. Are there other reasons that we don't feel like we can talk about this?
There's lots of reasons that people feel like they can't talk about their personal experience of abortion. Certainly the fact that abortion kind of exists in the realm of politics and sort of out there as something that's separate or away from us, or it's something that other people experience. It's generally not something we know what to say to our friends and family about. And so I think there's certainly social stigma, and it can be seen as taboo, and we feel like we have to keep it a secret, which certainly all the women on this panel are challenging right now, today. But it can be hard to know what to say to someone in your life that you love about your abortion experience, and it can be hard for someone who's hearing a story for the first time to know how to respond. We can kind of jump to conclusions really fast and say that was the right thing or that was the wrong thing. And our experience at Exhale, which provides a national peer counseling service for women who've had abortions who can call to talk about their experience. We also hear from a lot of loved ones and significant others who are trying to figure out how to be a source of support, how to be a source of comfort. And so we just sort of talk through how to listen in a non-judgmental way, how to let people know you're there, not to make assumptions about the meaning of an abortion in someone's life, to be able to ask open-ended questions, that all of those things can help really create connection in place of feelings of isolation or feeling alone.
Yeah, I mean, Kate, you had an ectopic pregnancy, which is a bit different, and then needed to have an abortion because of that. When you would tell people that, did they hold it as equally difficult as having to make any other type of choice, or did they treat it like something different?
I think people didn't know how to treat it at all. But I suppose probably it was the closest to more like a miscarriage is how people thought about it. So because I really wanted to be pregnant, I mean, I'm the old lady in this group. I was 33 when I got pregnant, and I really wanted to be pregnant. I have been trying for more than a year. I should say we. And so I was ecstatic to be pregnant, and then I found out it was in my tube, which some people, even Catholics, don't necessarily like to call abortion because they want to draw a distinction between an abortion and the removal of an ectopic pregnancy. But the fact of the matter is, as soon as I knew that this baby was doomed, I wanted it out of me. And I was surprised at how quickly I turned on it. I really wanted it. And then suddenly I was like, get rid of it because I want to try again and I wanted to have a baby. So I think that people aren't quite sure how to deal with that because it doesn't fit any paradigm.
You know, Sarah, originally this segment was going to be just about regret, and then we realized that was too one-dimensional, and I was worried that somehow positioned abortion as being implicitly a bad thing. Did you ever worry that in talking about the fact that this is complicated, that there is an element of regret, that you are somehow undermining your own choice or the choice that other women might make? I've got you muted again. Just hit that button for me. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Look, I don't regret my decision. The only thing I regret is that I didn't take care of myself and I allowed myself to be in a situation where I had to make the decision I made. And while certainly 7 years later, I was faced with this enormous mental challenge of having to bring together these two opposing viewpoints and consolidate them into one sort of reconciled, I guess, metaphor for healing. I never felt any regret for the decision that I made.
Yeah, Natalia, Natalia, you started by telling no one. Do you hit a point where then you feel like you're going to combust because you're carrying with you this reality of a choice that, you stand by, and yet a choice that has to be isolating if no one else who knows you and loves you knows about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that people need to understand that the feelings don't stop after the procedure is done. And in my situation, I felt mostly relief. I felt liberated. I felt fortunate. I didn't struggle very much with regret, but that didn't mean I didn't have plenty to say about the experience that I went through. And keeping it a secret is hard. I mean, my secret came out when my mom read my diary. And it was just downhill from there. I found once that my parents knew, that was the hardest bridge for me to cross. And then once that was passed, I felt like I wanted to tell everyone.
Because you felt like they rejected you, or because you felt like you would let them down? I mean, why was it so hard to tell them?
That's a really hard question to answer. I think it's really because of the societal stigma. My parents identify as pro-choice, and we have a very close-knit family. So on paper, there's no reason I couldn't have asked them for help. But there was something in my mind that said, you're supposed to be ashamed about this. You're not supposed to talk about it, especially if your story doesn't fit the standard model that's out there, which is sadness and regret. And my feelings were so much more complex than that I didn't even know where to begin, because there's not a working model out there for me to look at and say, oh yeah, that's how I felt too. And I found that in telling my story publicly, I've become that model for other people. And a lot of women say that the more they hear stories, the more comfortable they are telling their own. So I'm really happy to be able to do that for other women when, I was a teenager and I didn't feel like I could talk about it at all.
Aspen, what happens to people who tell no one? What's the toll?
Well, I think we have to be careful in making any sort of blanket stereotypes or judgments about any one person's experience. And so there's plenty of reasons why someone could keep their abortion a secret, and that could actually be the best decision for them, depending on what their family situation is, what their work situation is. It's still a risk to tell your story, to tell someone in your life, or to go public in the ways that, Sarah and Cassie and Natalia and Kate, in the ways that we have. That's not necessarily true for everyone. I think the important thing for a woman who's had an abortion, whether or not she tells someone about it, is that she feels like she's able to identify her feelings. If there's some way for her to process those feelings, maybe it's talking to somebody, maybe it's just writing them down, maybe it's keeping them in a journal that potentially a mother won't read, unlike Natalia's story. But even just that process of getting it out can be really healing or really soothing. And then they can make a decision about whether or not they want to do something else beyond that.
I mean, Cassie, you had this funny incident where you sort of hoped your parents would figure it out, and they did. Maybe your mom was also reading your diary.
Yeah, she lived in Kentucky and I was in Vermont, and I called her. I just wanted to hear her voice. I needed some comfort, and I think, unconsciously I wanted her support and I wanted advice. And I called and I burst into tears as soon as she answered the phone. And in the background, my father said, "She's pregnant, isn't she?" And I was, and my mom said, "Are you pregnant?" And I said, "Yes, I'm so sorry." And she told me I could come home and raise the baby, and I said immediately I was having an abortion.
And was it a relief to tell them on some level?
It was a relief to tell them. I was surprised. I had no idea how they would respond because we had never, ever discussed abortion. I don't think the word had been uttered in my home. And they were shockingly
This is what happens
supportive.
when you send your kid to a hippy-dippy state like Vermont for college. That's probably what they thought to themselves.
I don't know. Yeah, they might have thought that. I know that they were just loving and supportive the whole way through. So, and they still continue to be today.
I throw this question out to everyone, which is when we talk about reproductive justice, we very often focus on the actual service of an abortion being offered, as well as access to contraceptives and family planning. But I do wonder if, in addition to that, there needs to be more of an emphasis on mental health care, on both, therapeutic services before, where you can talk to someone who you really trust, and also services after. And I don't just mean the few weeks after, but the months and years after, where you really might need to flesh this out with someone.
I think absolutely that there needs to be more of an emphasis on that, but without the assumption, without the loaded assumption that because a woman needs to talk or needs care afterwards, that she's somehow damaged.
Right.
It's not, because it's not that simple.
Is it possible, though, to disentangle those two things? I mean, we live in a society that sort of comes implicitly from that vantage point, even though there are plenty of women like you, Natalia, who are comfortable saying, I made the right choice for myself.
I think it's really hard. I think that as a society, we have a lot to unpack about this. I cried a lot after my abortion, even though I still identify more with feelings of liberation and relief. It's just not that simple. And I think the first step for us as a culture to unpack that and learn to understand it more is just to listen.
Yeah, I mean, Kate, I want to ask, there are a lot of people watching our comment while we're having so many different interesting conversations there. So thank you to our community for treating this as the sensitive and serious topic that it is. But someone watches this and she finds herself either in the case of having an unintended pregnancy or having a pregnancy that is not viable as your pregnancy was. What would you want her to know? What would you tell her?
Well, I would agree with Natalia that the first thing to do is listen, because every woman is different. And I know that people don't want to hear that. People want there to be sort of universal blanket statements that are always true about women or are always true about fetuses. And I think that the truth is we don't have those blanket statements. So I would definitely argue for listening, and then you go from there. I would want to be supportive in any case. And I think also a lot matters on who the family is. I mean, who she has as a support system. Not everybody has a support system, and that makes a big difference too.
Sarah?
I'd like to also point out that just as when a woman gives birth, her hormone levels can change and her emotions can become unrecognizable to her, that I think the same can happen after an abortion. There is that hormonal swing, and suddenly, the estrogen levels deplete, and there you are back at square one. And I think that a lot of the tears that come from the abortion are because of that, but there can be a lingering sense of sadness that is also from hormones. And I think that the psychiatric community needs to be aware of that as well, that some women may experience some feelings of postpartum depression, even though there is no actual baby, but because of the changes that their bodies have endured. And looking back on it, I think that may have happened to me, and I certainly can imagine that it would be happening to others as well.
We wanted to create enough space for people to share their stories, and I just want to bring in some stories that people are sharing in the comment well. 83 Reasons saying, I've had to make this choice. It's very real and happens all the time. You can't take it back. I was 17 and in lust. I didn't think twice about it then, but I think about it a lot now that I'm older. Eddie Potato saying, we had one when we were dating. We were young and stupid. We couldn't handle having a child at the time. We ended up getting married years later and got pregnant 6 years after that. Thank you to both of you for sharing those comments with us. And it makes me curious seeing this comment from Eddie Potatoes Aspen, if you get calls from men. Because in as much as this is uniquely a women's issue, it also is an issue that affects families and partners.
Thank you so much for saying that. I mean, as far as I know, women don't get pregnant on our own. So often, there is partners, there is family members, there are friends. So it's approximately, 13% of our calls to our talk line every year are who we say our loved ones or significant others. That could be a mom, that could be a dad of someone who's had an abortion. It could also be a husband or a boyfriend or a partner. So we definitely have those calls, and those are similar and different than women. Sometimes the person is calling just because they're trying to figure out how best to support someone they love who's had an abortion. Sometimes they're calling because they want that, and they're having their own emotions or feelings about it. And I think when it's really challenging is if the emotions of a partner are different than the emotions of a woman, and sort of how do you sort through the fact that you're having very different experiences. We actually just saw this play out on TV last week. There was an episode of Parenthood, the NBC drama, and there was a teenage couple, Amy and Drew, who went through an abortion, and Amy and Drew's reaction to it were very different. And you read the social media comments and people sort of take a side, like, I relate with Drew and I don't with Amy, or sort of vice versa. And I think that's part of the challenge of the cultural climate we find ourselves in around abortion, that there's a lot of picking sides, that things are either right or wrong or good or bad. And the reality is this is an experience that humans go through, and humans are complicated, and we're not always clear, and we have a lot of layers and nuance around our life experiences and our emotions. And so that listening that everyone has really spoken to matters. And just to go back to your question about whether or not we need services, certainly Exhale provides a service, and you can learn about ours on our website. We also reference some other services that are available to women. But I do believe this is really a shared responsibility for the health and well-being of women in our lives who have abortions, that it matters what you say to someone that you love. It matters how you talk about abortion around your friends and family, because that's going to signal whether or not you're going to be someone they're going to reach out to when an abortion happens. And let's not forget that abortions do happen, and it is really common. 1 in 3 women have them, so it doesn't help much to pretend like it's something that happens to other people, because it happens to us.
Yep, I want to bring in this follow-up comment from Eddie Potatoes, who says, I sat in the clinic with her, meaning his then girlfriend, his now wife. We were in it together and will be till the day we die. So yeah, it was a big deal for me too. Thanks again, Eddie, for sharing that. I mean, Cassie, you grappled with this in a way where you were even going to retreats and sort of doing all of these therapeutic practices. Did you get something out of those? Would you recommend them to someone else? Because to me, they sort of set off an alarm, like they sound like gay camp, where it's like they're gonna either like make you pay for what you've done, or make you feel guilty about it, or make you sign a waiver saying you're never gonna do it again. Did you feel like it really had the therapeutic value that you wanted?
So one of them was a little bit like gay camp, in that way, and there were affidavits passed out at the end in case we wanted to testify against abortion in Congress. But some of them were really helpful to me, and especially there was a Buddhist ritual called Mizuko Kuyo, or a water baby ceremony, and that was about just respecting the potential for a life, and just respecting the experience that I went through. And there was another one, I did a Jewish post-abortion ritual that was actually, this is strange to say, but it was actually very fun and joyful, and a celebration of making, of healing, basically. Not of making the decision, but of healing afterward.
Yeah, Natalia, how do you get someone to the place you're at where you are comfortable owning this and sharing it and making sure that other women and men can find value in your experience? How does one turn that corner from having this be a really private thing that they share with no one to actually being a face of what reproductive justice looks like?
For me, it was just a snowball effect. Once I told one person, I wanted to tell everyone. And I got such positive feedback from talking about my story from other women that it just became this huge thing. It had a life of its own. And I realized that it's really helpful, that story sharing is really helpful. It has a power to it. It's nourishing. I don't think I would be doing this if I didn't see such an enormous need for people to hear these stories and then to tell their own.
Yeah, I want to bring in this final comment from I'm Dropping Dimes, who says, it is unhealthy to keep abortion a secret for some people, as it is to keep any secret. One of my close friends only told 3 people she was having an abortion, me, her best girlfriend, and her sister. Before she told anyone she was depressed and kept to herself for months. So for some, clearly Aspen, a tremendous benefit in sharing, but as you've said, it's not the same for everyone. This is just as the situation in which you get into this is unique, the response you have is unique coming out of it. Is an abortion a thing that is ever over, or is it a thing that in some ways becomes a lifelong experience?
That's a not simple question to answer. You know, I had my abortion in 1999. I've been talking about it for a long time. And there are certainly days where I'm like, am I really going to have to talk about my abortion for the rest of my life? Because now it's such an obviously big part of my job and my leadership. And so, you know, it is something that I went through. It has had a huge impact on who I am as a person. I've learned a lot from the experience. I've learned a lot from talking to other people who've had the experience, by listening to them, by hearing the ways that their experience is different than mine or similar than mine. So I don't imagine there's a time when I would, you know, forget that I had an abortion. And yet, you know, the emotional sort of piece of it changes over time. So there's still moments when it feels emotional, and I'm surprised by it at this point because I do talk about it so much. But there's still moments where it feels emotional in that more like real new way, and then and most of the time it's not. And I imagine if we asked everyone else on this panel, that they would have a different response about how you sort of carry or not carry that abortion experience with you through your life.
Does anyone want to weigh in on this before we go? Everyone's talked out. All right, Aspen, Cassie, Kate, Natalia, Sarah, I cannot thank you all enough for sharing your stories and your insights. I really appreciate it. I know that our community does too. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This conversation continues, though, in our comments while you're watching HuffPost Live.